Flames of Retribution. Chapter 1. The Lost Faith. Father Jonathan Bennett was once a man of unshakable faith, devoted to his parish and to God. But the tragic death of his younger sister, Lily, had shattered his beliefs. Lily had been only 20, full of life and dreams. Her sudden death in a car accident felt cruel and senseless to Jonathan. In the aftermath, he found himself questioning everything he had ever believed in. The small town of Havenfield adored Father Bennett. He was a pillar of the community, known for his compassion and wisdom. But as grief consumed him, his sermons became less about faith and more about the futility of life. Parishioners began to notice the change, whispering among themselves about the priest's growing bitterness. Jonathan's once serene and comforting church now seemed cold and hollow. The hymns felt like empty words, and the prayers offered no solace. He found himself standing before the altar, staring at the crucifix with a mixture of anger and sorrow. How could a loving God allow such suffering? His grief turned into anger, and his anger soon morphed into a burning desire for retribution. If God had taken Lily from him, then Jonathan would punish God by destroying the very place that symbolized his presence. The idea took root in his mind, festering and growing until it was all he could think about. He began to meticulously plan the church's destruction. Every detail was considered. The time of night when the streets were deserted, the best places to set the fires to ensure the building's complete annihilation, and the escape route he would take. As he prepared, a sinister determination grew within him. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. Jonathan spent his days as a priest, performing his duties with a facade of normalcy. But every night he immersed himself in his plan. He collected gasoline, rags, and matches, hiding them in the church's basement. He grew more withdrawn, his eyes haunted by the visions of the inferno he would unleash. The nights grew darker, as if the heavens sensed his intentions. Strange occurrences began to plague him. Shadows seemed to move on their own. Whispers filled the empty halls, and the once comforting statues of saints appeared to watch him with accusing eyes. One evening after a particularly troubling day, Jonathan found himself alone in the sanctuary, staring at the stained glass windows. The light from the setting sun cast eerie patterns on the floor, making the saints depicted in the glass seem almost alive. He felt a chill run down his spine. "Jonathan," the voice was soft, almost a whisper. He turned sharply, but the church was empty. His heart pounded, but he brushed it off as his imagination. Yet the whispers persisted, growing louder each night. They spoke of sins and damnation, echoing his own guilt and despair. He tried to dismiss the voices, but they were relentless. They echoed in his mind, disrupting his thoughts and making it hard to concentrate on anything else. Sleep became elusive, and when he did manage to rest, his dreams were filled with haunting visions of flames and shadows. Chapter 3. The Final Preparations. The night of his planned arson approached. Jonathan's mind was a tempest of anger, grief, and a gnawing fear that he refused to acknowledge. He spent the day going through the motions of his priestly duties, feeling the weight of the matches in his pocket like a dark secret. That evening, as he stood before the congregation, he delivered a sermon that was as much a farewell as it was a warning. "Faith is tested in ways we cannot understand," he said, his voice trembling. "We must hold on to what is good, even when the world seems to fall apart." The parishioners listened, oblivious to the torment in their priest's heart. As they left, Jonathan lingered, watching them go with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. He locked the church doors behind them, sealing himself in. In the quiet of the empty church, he made his final preparations. He soaked the rags in gasoline, placing them strategically around the building. He poured a trail of fuel from the altar to the back door, ensuring a quick escape. As he struck the match, the whispers grew to a cacophony, filling his mind with a relentless chant. "Jonathan, Jonathan." His hand trembled as he held the match, the small flame illuminating his face. For a moment, he hesitated, the weight of his actions bearing down on him. Could he really go through with it? The memory of Lily's lifeless body flashed before his eyes, and his resolve hardened. He dropped the match. Chapter 4. The Supernatural Siege. The match flickered to life, and Jonathan watched as the flame touched the gasoline-soaked rags. But before the fire could spread, an unseen force knocked the match from his hand, extinguishing the flame instantly. Shocked, he staggered back, his heart pounding in his chest. The temperature in the church plummeted, and a chilling wind whipped through the sanctuary. The statues of saints and angels seemed to twist and contort, their serene expressions morphing into visages of torment. The candles flickered and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. "Jonathan, you cannot escape your sin," a voice boomed, echoing through the church. It was not a whisper, but a thunderous proclamation that shook him to his core. Terrified, Jonathan tried to run, but the doors he had locked now refused to open. The air grew thick, and he struggled to breathe. He fell to his knees, gasping for air, as a dark, oppressive presence filled the room. The supernatural forces that had been haunting him now revealed their full power. Shadows coalesced into forms, grotesque and menacing, surrounding Jonathan. They whispered of his guilt, his anger, and his blasphemy. They spoke with voices that were both familiar and alien, a blend of his own thoughts and something far darker. "Your faith is a lie, Jonathan. You sought to destroy what you could not understand," he cried out, his voice echoing in the vast, empty church. "Why? Why did you take her from me?" But the shadows only laughed, a sound that chilled him to the bone. "Lily's fate was not yours to decide, just as your own fate is now beyond your control." The shadows began to close in, and Jonathan felt an excruciating pain in his chest, as if his heart were being torn apart. He clutched at his chest, falling to the cold stone floor. The pain intensified, and he screamed, the sound ripping through the silence of the church. Chapter 5. The torment begins. Jonathan's agony was unrelenting. The shadows tightened their grip, and he felt his sanity slipping away. Visions of his sister, her eyes filled with sorrow and disappointment, haunted him. "Why, Jonathan? Why did you let your anger consume you?" He could barely form words, his voice a ragged whisper. "I'm sorry, Lily. I didn't know what else to do." But there was no solace in her gaze, only a deep, abiding sadness. The supernatural forces seemed to feed on his torment, growing stronger with every passing moment. The church around him began to burn, not with the fire he had intended, but with an unholy flame that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The flames were black and cold, consuming everything in their path without heat or light. Jonathan's screams echoed through the inferno, but no one was there to hear them. The church, once a place of refuge and hope, had become a hellish prison. As the flames closed in, he felt his soul being torn apart, piece by piece. The pain was unbearable, but worse was the feeling of utter helplessness. Jonathan had always been a man of action, but now he was powerless against the forces that tormented him. Every attempt to fight back was met with more pain, more darkness. The black flames licked at his skin, causing an icy burn that felt like it was freezing his very soul. The shadows whispered of his failures, his broken faith, and his betrayal of everything he had once held dear. He could see the faces of his parishioners, twisted in horror and disappointment, blaming him for the desecration of their sanctuary. Chapter 6. The Evil End. The transformation was complete. Jonathan's body was now a vessel for the darkness, a puppet controlled by a malevolent force. He no longer had any memories of his past life. He was an empty shell, driven by a single purpose, to spread the darkness. His tormentors had one final act of cruelty in store for him. As the black flames consumed his flesh, they did not kill him. Instead, they transformed him into a creature of the night, a twisted reflection of his former self. He was no longer Father Jonathan Bennett. He was a harbinger of doom, a bringer of despair. The church burned to the ground, leaving nothing but ashes and ruin. The townspeople mourned the loss of their beloved priest and their place of worship, never knowing the true evil that had unfolded within those hallowed walls. Jonathan's soul was lost, trapped in an eternal torment of his own making, a prisoner of the supernatural forces he had unleashed. He wandered the ruins of Havenfield, a shadow of his former self, spreading fear and despair wherever he went. In the dead of night, when the town was silent and the streets were empty, Jonathan's wails could be heard, echoing through the darkness. He was a ghost, a reminder of the dangers of losing one's faith and giving in to anger and grief. The once peaceful town of Havenfield was now a place of shadows and whispers. The church's ruins became a haunted place, avoided by all. And in the darkness, Jonathan's tormented spirit lingered, a warning to all who dared to challenge the divine. The end was not just a punishment for Jonathan, but a warning to all who let their anger and grief consume them. For in seeking to destroy what they do not understand, they may find themselves consumed by a darkness far greater than they ever imagined.